All right, let me get started. And I see a few here, and if you want to just keep working and have one ear open, as I would say, I record these and they're there. And I'm not disappointed that there's only a few here. I try to design the course so it can be taken hybrid and people online. So it's we get to the point, we're almost there a few weeks into the course, where I've put a lot of the content out there, given it what I think is my best shot at explaining things. And so if I'm sage on the stage, then I've put it in some videos. So I do use our time together, usually on Mondays, to make sure we understand where we are, maybe unpack what's going on in some of the assignments. It's really great if somebody runs questions across my bow, even by email and that kind of thing. Then I can address them to the class. But in terms of, well, gee, I'm going to come at 2:30 and he's going to tell me everything I need to know. Well, I will, but a lot of that will be maybe click this, read this, but then react and respond with questions. But I got a couple of things I'm going to show, but it's again, it helps me to help you if you provide me some guidance. As always, going to click onto the agenda. Don't forget, you can always go back to the good stuff that was there before. We don't meet as a class next Monday. It's the Labor Day holiday. I've got stuff out there and it doesn't do much with our schedule. And Wednesdays will almost always, unless maybe I say otherwise, but I'll remind you, a guide on the side. I won't even set up, I'll be set up to record in case, gee, here's something that maybe everybody needs to know that I didn't think of. As I said, everything that I can think of to get to you, I've tried to dump here into the agenda and let you get to it. So I hope you're kind of going through these the Linux modules. To me, he's a very good presenter. You know, you might say, well, it's just blah, blah, unless I need the specific. But if you're going to be in IT as a career, part of your building of that professionalism is to be a little like a sponge and know a little bit about a lot of things, okay, and then go deep, perhaps in one or two areas. And the going deep might come more in your junior and senior years, but having a smattering and an understanding of how Linux commands work, how PowerShell and Windows commands work, is really just part of it. So, where will that come out? Probably in assignments when you're at the Linux command line and need to do something, and I didn't demo in the video exactly what you should do, or we do have a quiz coming up where you have to do some command line stuff. And similar, this is a system admin in Windows Server, and you need every bit of that. Well, knowing where to look and having a framework is the important thing. We'll get to kind of start on the first real chapter. We're going to spread it over a few weeks in the operating systems thing, so maybe getting started on it. But a couple of things, and I'll touch on them today. There's a couple of videos embedded in our material, is this idea of what I call old school scripting. By coming in here, you should have either had Python or maybe tested out of it somehow. That's a scripting language, gets interpreted. You maybe have had C# programming 1301, or maybe if you got to bypass that, have some other experience. But you ought to realize that the two venerable scripting languages for Linux, it's Bash. For DOS, which preceded kind of Windows, is Batch or BAT. And you'll get to work with those in this next assignment. And so here's a couple of things. Say, read, what is it? And it's got an overview. And then it does, kind of go on to in more detail and as much as you can stand. But there's an example of a batch script. And what you ought to understand fundamentally about a script, okay, is it's a text file that will, when you have the operating system execute what's in the text file, in order, like a recipe, and there's opportunities for looping and opportunities for what we call alternation, iteration and alternation. Alternation is like if statements. If a condition holds, we want to execute this code. Otherwise, else we want to execute that code. By the way, I've been asked a few times, well, where do I get the answers to this quiz that's coming up? Well, here's an example of my shell.script in something I've asked you to look at. And here somewhere is, I had it up, is a, some part of, and I think you might get these questions on the online quiz you get to do for TechPrac 2 coming up. You have 2 weeks to do it. Really puts you into Linux commands. And so, what special line is normally placed at the top of a custom shell script? Well, when did you go over that in class? Well, I did it on Monday, August 30th at 2:35 p.m. For instance, when I said, how am I going to remember all this? But sometimes looking back things up on the web is a good way to go. And I'm not making fun, but I'm just saying we're trying to remind you that where you get this information is a lot of different places and absorbing it, but you do have this great thing called the internet. And another, maybe not quite as great thing with the agenda is maybe that there is somewhere to go. But it is traditional in the Linux world to start your file with. This is really a comment, but that might get operated that reminds the reader of this text file that it's a script file. But that's a little bit of the cart before the horse. I was more going through, kind of positioning ourselves today and unpacking, if you will, or here's the things to read, study, and execute. Similar about batch, and kind of related to this idea of working at the command line is this idea of environment variables. Okay, there are all kinds of places where the operating system stores things that it needs to remember. I'm here on a Surface, but underneath the this Windows that's on a Surface is DOS, basically. Back when I bought my first computer, and it was $2,500, and it had 2 floppy drives, and I forget how little memory. What you got when you started the computer was just this black screen with command lines. But I did this command called set, and in the DOS environment, it shows all the what are called environment variables, system, values that the operating system lets you have access to help make the programs, applications, and scripts that happen to be run that much easier. So for instance, there is this variable called app data. And it's got this kind of a funny value. It says my app data is going to be in this long folder here. I'm going off on a tangent, but one of the tenets, if principles of information technology, and I've probably got a dozen and I'm starting to write them down, but one of them is never use a magic string or a number, and I'm putting that in quotes, a specific value for something when you can use a variable or a generic value instead. When you did TechPrac 1, when you got to that part where it says, remember the directory you are in and go to the root directory, I hope you used push D, and then in Windows it would be backslash. What that push D did was remembered what folder I'm in. And to get back there, and it'll be minus a couple of points if you didn't, when I go pop D, it did remember where to get back to, not because I had to say CD and remember what my home folder was, or type in CD and use what user /TSCH. This was there were no magic strings here. I didn't, the magic string would be this specific value. Another, I think this will work. I know I can do it in, if I wanted to see what app data was associated with what I'm doing here in Windows, I could say, well, let's see, go out and try to figure out where my app data folder is and do dir users TSCH app data roaming by using this, and those percents on the outside indicate it's a variable. In DOS, I think it's hash marks, something in Linux, we can get to it. But by here, I didn't need to use a magic string. You might say %appdata is a magic string. Well, no, that's a variable. And when you log in and you use %appdata% on a Windows computer, then it will go to your particular wherever your application data is stored, and you don't really have to kind of know exactly what that is to work with it. So, gosh, where was I going? Just, environmental variables. So a quick look at this idea of environmental variables is there are a bunch of values, my home folder, where my program files are, a lot of things that the system remembers. We have a little bit of configuration by convention. That is, the main drive is called C, and the root to the main drive, or where we're going to put program files is somewhere. It's for x64, it'd be program files. For 32-bit, it's x86 program files. But it's really the system doesn't remember those specific values. It says, I'm going to use this variable to tell me where it is. And you can reconfigure the machine to go somewhere else. Even this prompt environment variable, the fact that it shows me the $$P, $G is where I lost the prompt. This is saying, well, what prompt do you want in this command window? And I think P says the path and G is the greater than, right? So if I wanted to change that, I could say prompt by your command. I think that'll work. So now I can be a Cylon leader, and I have this. Well, I have the Cylon. I don't know if you Battlestar Galactica, y'all might be too young or something like that, but they'd all say by your command when they were doing. The idea is you can configure almost anything in these systems, and a couple of sub-principles there. Boy, stick with the convention if you can. Don't reconfigure unless you really need to. That convention helps to help people understand where to go, and you could fool them a little bit by doing that. I guess I got a % in front. So another principle of computers, there's a blessing and a curse with computers. The blessing is they do exactly what you tell them. The curse is they do exactly what you tell them. Notice my prompt now has this % in front, okay? And that % in front became because when I fat fingered this, I put it there. All right, so that got my prompt back to something else. And okay, crap. Didn't say that, got a message trying to help this student get connected, and it's having issues. All right, but we will get that, try to make that go away. So was just sort of laying, that's kind of to read this week. I'm recording this, and yeah, so and I've already kind of done a few of the things. Let's see, I was going to get in Linux and show a couple of things. Why is this thing not? There we are. Okay, so I've got my Linux VM open. And it's almost, it's not going to work. Right. And we'll do most of our work in Linux at the command line. I don't think set works. Yeah, it does. If I do set in Linux, so these two operating systems at the command line are a little bit similar, just similar enough to get confusing. It looked, I typed set. In Linux, they actually have some command variables set to, let me just see if I can scroll this up, to long, little snippets of script. And some of these are even picture values, but if I scroll up far enough, I can see that Linux has, does some of the same things with the environment variables, just that help the system remind itself, where things are and what to do and get there without, having to type a specific value. Clear just clears the screen. Well, good. Trying to think of, let me demo a little bit about, well, you ought to know about commands like ls, right? Read about it. Ls in Linux shows you folders. With the -A, it shows you, shows files in folders. So wherever I happen to be positioned, which is my home folder, as it turns out, I have folders called desktop documents downloads. They're blue, right? And files. But if I do ls-a, it shows me the system files as well. So kind of hidden were these files that have a dot in front. They're operating system files. There's also the notion of dot is my home folder, dot is the parent. If I want to see the files, ls, the files that are in the folder above mine, my parent, if I do ls ... that's the parameterless way to say, show me the folders that are in the folder above me. You can go 2 levels up. And that didn't work because it's /. And so that goes 2 folders up, which happens to, I think, be the root folder. Confusing thing about root, and I'm really just kind of walking on things about Linux and operating systems. I did cd/, that gets you to the root folder of whatever drive you happen to be on, okay? Confusingly, there's also this folder there that's called root. I just saw it and then I lost it. There it is, root. And the root folder is where, okay, so root folder and root user are 2 different things. The root folder is that / in Linux, / in DOS. Linux has the notion of a root user, the supreme administrator of the system, and in the olden days we would log in as root if we wanted to do anything. And you might be too young to remember Person of Interest TV series, but there was a character on there, pretty impressive young woman, and not hard to look at, I shouldn't say that, but anyway, but her name was Root, and that usually, if you're talking about root or get root access, you pretty much own the system. It turns out that I have root privilege. When we look at user groups and that kind of thing, we'll see how we do that. But when I tried to see what was in that root folder, it said permission denied. Okay? And so what you learned and should internalize is in Linux, if you want to execute a command where you want the root privilege for just that command, and by the way, you need to be in the root group to get that to happen, then you need to put sudo in front. sudo elevates your privilege for that next command. So if something isn't working, then remember to do that. There is a switch user command, okay, which allows you to log in as another user, and if you know their password, that will work out. If you do sudo su, so kind of notice here, my prompt is my login ID. This is in Linux as a default, a login ID at hostname. Okay, and by the way, if you didn't change your host names, well, I'll ding a few points, but I changed those. If this is saying Ubuntu in yours, then you missed a little step in some of what you did. Not the end of the world, but it makes a difference sometimes for pinging and getting access and that kind of thing. So great. But if, so switch user, if I created another user, I could open up a terminal as that user. If you do sudo su, I am now logged in as root, okay? And I have all the root privilege. If you, I can now look at root, and the only thing in the root folder is this thing called snap. I don't have to prefix my commands with root when I'm logged in as root. And as I was saying, it's it's maybe regarded as a bad way to operate except for short bursts, because when you have all the admin privilege, it's easy to forget that you have it. You might do something that really is destructive. And I wish I would have been reminded that I needed that command privilege. That's why that sudo in front. At least you're doing something to say, I realize I'm executing something that needs this extra privilege. So things about the system. Let's talk about, one thing that Linux has that I wish Windows has is it's a tilde. If you do cd tilde, it will move you back to your home folder, whatever that happens to be. And in Linux, that is, as a default, is /home/login ID. I think if you do ls.l, that's another, maybe it will show, well, ls.l shows a complete listing. Sorry, where am I? Anyway, I'm trying to figure out how to to see what the name of the folder I'm in. And I know there's a command, but I've just happened to forget it. I'm going to, let's talk a little bit about making a script. If I'm going to make a script, I need to edit a text file. And as you probably got used to, or if it's first time, a command line editor that comes with Linux it's called nano. So nano is a command says I want to edit a file, and I'm going to do a demo s.sh. It's traditional to have a file extension of .sh for shell, or sometimes .bash for bash shell, the basic shell, and in Linux, and great. And a script file, as I said, is nothing but a list of commands that I'm trying to think of something else that I could do. I could cat when I'm done sh. So I've got some commands. Echo says pop back on the screen, whatever's next. All right. ls, we know that says that is the list of the folders. -a says show me the system files. Cat says show me the innards, what's inside. When I'm done, to get out of Nano, and I think I have a link on our links page to the full Nano guide, we won't be editing that deeply. That maybe you need to read it, but realize you type the lines. One thing you can't do in Nano is like click somewhere. It's not mouse aware. You have to use arrow keys to kind of get up and down. If you click somewhere and start typing, it's wherever you happen to be. When you're ready to exit, do Control X. You'll get this say modified buffer, answering no will discard changes. So if you say, oh, I don't want that, then let it go. So I hit Y, and it kind of came up. Now it says, oh, the file name to write. And if you nanoed a particular file name, that's going to appear in there. And so if I press Enter, then that's going to overwrite that demo sh with whatever I just did. I could, if I wanted to save as, I could give it a different name, and not a lot of big drama, but if I do sh, say I want to execute shell, I could turn this into executable, and I think it would go by itself, but sh then demo sh says execute that file I just gave you, the demo.sh, as a as a shell script. And so what did it do? It echoed you are here. It did the ls.a. And these last 3 lines here, I just kind of wanted to highlight them, is kind of this is the result of the cat. Show me the contents of the file demo sh. So that's kind of the basics of a shell. There are ways to work with variables and other things. That's what the videos get into. Is there a question?
Yeah. What would happen, say, you misspelled echo? Right?
Okay.
What would happen if you ran that?
And that's a great question. So the question is, that's great. If we go down the happy path and everything, if I left something out, it gets a little bit, so doing a couple of things. There is no file demo X. Well, each of these would, in this case, and I'm just going to clear. Sometimes I ask you to clear just to get any, oops. One thing I've done here, by the way, is, if you hit the up arrow, it'll bring up your last command. If you hit the up arrow again, it'll hit your next, and it'll kind of go up. So if you want to get back to a command that you put in before, and maybe you just either mistyped something, so I didn't go up enough, but you can get back. Now when I do this, it'll give you error messages. It'll say there's cho wasn't found, it wasn't a command. The ls-a worked out, and then the cat no such file or directory. Now it gets a little bit more involved if you're doing a script with variables and like that, but it will tell you the line number and the issue that you run into, and that might be a good, maybe I'll work up, rather than doing that on the fly with making an error in a variable or code, let me kind of can that for Wednesday, and if you're here you can see it live, or I'll record it. I just would like to kind of get the syntax right and get a good example rather than sort of fat fingering it now. But a real good question. What if I make errors? Yeah. Another question.
Certain command that you can't do while
in a script?
In a script, like there's certain command that they be like, okay, this command will be too much for us to handle because we don't have certain privileges.
And the answer, yes. So the question is there anything that's out of bounds in a script? No, there aren't. Some commands, like and I'm trying to add a user, and you get to do this later in the next assignment. So to add a user, the command line is add user. You need admin privilege to do it. This is in Linux. I'm just using an example of a command. And what I'm doing is trying to add a user whose login ID will be T user. So that's what that command does. Notice that the command, though, this particular command starts a dialog. Okay, it wants to know the password for that user. I guess I got to supply one. Let me make it PW. The other thing you used to get used to about Linux is when you're putting in passwords, it doesn't track. But then it asks the full name, right? And it asks the room number, wherever they are. What are their GCC 2300? A lot of these you can just enter through. But the point is, you have all these questions that come up. If you want your script to answer all those questions, that is, if you just want your script to let whoever ran the script put in the answers to the questions, then it's no problem. The script will stop and it'll be just like I'm seeing here. But if you say, no, I've got maybe a file and I've got to add 100 users, okay, and I want to read a user and they all have some default password, yeah, I want them to add it all, then that gets a little harder to use. So there's a way to then sort of give it an input file that will have the answers to all the questions that come up. But in terms of permission, no, but you'll need the sudo in front of the commands that require elevation, or that's sometimes where you pop into root if you're doing something in Go. But there's nothing that does, you just might think about, does that command ask for interaction, right? If I had a nano command in a shell script, then it's going to pop into nano and it's waiting for the person to type something in and finish that command before it goes on to the next one. So yeah, that's kind of a, and I said maybe a cook's tour of the first parts of this next assignment. So as this goes, if you look at TechPrac 2, you've got a quiz, some on scripting, and I think this video, but I'll come up with something how to troubleshoot and debug some of the scripts, because they can be a little bit head scratching to do. And you're going to do one where it takes parameters, and so that's the idea. Sometimes you want to run a script, but you want it to be general purpose. That is, it's going to add a new user, but I define the user. I provide that username when I run the script. And so the idea of parameterizing and some on environment variables. Kind of next week but you can do it all this week if you will. I just sort of think about doing half now and half. You'll be setting up for remote access on your VMs and doing some things with user policies, like their password policies and things like that. That's right. I guess you already added users in TechPrac 01, so it's and then we're doing things with policies. But it's similar in and it's a little different. This isn't quite a command line editor, the Notepad. But it is included when you get the non-GUI version of Windows. You can do this, and so what did I do? I did like a dir is like ls for that. Type is the command that shows the innards. Trying to think of what else. Anyway, I've got two commands that'll do a directory. It'll type out the line. I'm going to do save as just to make sure it kind of goes in the right place. So that was going to go up on my OneDrive, and that's not a problem that it goes in my OneDrive. But I would have to find it there. I'm just trying to make it go into this same folder that I happen to be in. All right. And so there is this demo bat file. And in Windows, you can just execute the command. You don't need to say it's a shell thing. It understands from the extension .bat that it should execute, and it's also echoing onto the screen. There's a way to keep it from doing this. It's putting the dir, it's pulling that from the script file, then I'm getting a directory, and then it's saying, the next command you told me was to type demo bat, and now I'm typing it out. But if you do much with bat files, then there's ways to, well, don't put the command on the screen, just do the command, and that kind of thing. But the principle is the same. It's just a text file that it goes, something that, and we'll do a little bit more with PowerShell coming on. That's, Microsoft a few years back came up with PowerShell as a more comprehensive scripting language. It allows, because of some aliasing, you to use DOS commands. Okay, so I can use dir. It's also smart enough that I did ls, which is a Linux command, and it showed me the directory. Get alias. That's because in PowerShell, and this is just a hit of things, PowerShell really is involved with what's called commandlets, sort of a verb-noun kind of way to do everything rather than some of these arcane and cryptic things, but then people give them short note. But this alias said, oh, if you see dir, then in PowerShell do a get child item, which is really the command in PowerShell to show me what's there. But we can also then alias, HIJLS, says get child item. So if you get big into PowerShell, there are ways to make it easy on anyone. If I wanted to, I don't know if demo by itself will work. I think I have to, there's a way to get it to, I thought I put ampersand in front. There is, it's a preceding character, and I'll look it up. But there is a way to get the bat files to run, but the native files for PowerShell would be .ps1. And there's PowerShell. They've got a version for that runs on Linux, trying to do this cross-platform and the same everywhere. So, and that's really kind of, you know, maybe what I think is enough to get started. And you know, I'm going to, if there aren't more questions, I'll stop the recording, and then certainly, you know, be happy to answer individual kinds of stuff. And question.
So when you're trying to basically say create a program that creates users on a Linux server, would you have to, like, if you want to do it automatically, would you have to like pipe in the answers?
That's the way to do it. Yeah. And right, and so there's a way to, and maybe I'll demo this on Wednesday, just if you want to see it, but there is a way to, yeah, kind of, you could either put it in a file or put it ahead and just, you know, just say, here's some things to save up sort of in a buffer, and when you get to command, it squirts it in. And, or you can say, oh, go get the answers from this text file out here. And, but a real good question. We're trying to automate some things off of a file, which is, for a system admin, you do that a lot. It's rare that you, oh, my job today is to add one user. It might be my job today is to, you know, onboard 100 different users, and they all have different privileges and configurations that are needed. All right, well, good. And